Here we are for the second session of the day with a demonstration of shading with volumes. And while we are at it, I might actually for once do the right thing and put in some guidelines if I can find the tool here. I think it's the angle one here. No, this is an angle tool. Ah, it's the circle with the arrows in it. We can add a number of different functions here. I am going to put in a red one, and I'm going to change it into a blue one. I want to put in another one and see if I can have them be different colors. No, doesn't seem to be working all that well. It's probably possible in some way, but would perhaps be more effort than it's worth at the time. So we now get this line drawn from both vanishing points and some amount of grade the whole time. So over at the tools, we are going to take some lighter blue again, and I am going to mark off this area here, and I think the opposite is going to be this area here for some making things more difficult than necessary for me. This is going to turn into a cube, and it will contain a barrel, and the barrel will be shaded as if it were hidden, if it were lit from behind. So, what do we want here? Let's start once again with a I will draw a circle up here. Either I am somehow misusing the function, or doesn't look right to me. I think the guidelines here aren't actually going to be helpful for this use. I'm going to do this by hand. There's a midpoint here, and I think the midpoints here and here and here, they are clearly identical angles from the vanishing point, but that doesn't seem to translate into this use case. So let's try to draw a circle at the top here. That is looking better. Barrels, stereotypically, are thicker in the middle than they are at the sides. So we want, we have this here, and we would like to have this here. And then I'm going to get into the, hand drawing parts of it. I am going to start a new layer, change colors, take away half of the area here, and now I am actually using the guidelines. Should really rotate the canvas here. So let's do it. See? That suddenly became much easier. So then we are going to have the midpoints. Then rotate a bit back. Seems like you have to click to and away from the current layer after rotating it when you have the line assistance on. Sort of kind of buggy there, but not a huge problem. As long as you notice it quickly and enough and aren't stuck wondering what's wrong. I often get stuck with some weird tool settings that I've put on, like when I use the unusual selection options, like subtraction, addition, and so on. The normal one is just a new selection, but you can configure the selection tool just to add parts. So when you click add in a new area, you add it to the selection. Or when you click in a new area, it removes it from the selection. You could do all of that on the keyboards, like of course Shift adds, and various combination of Shift, Alt, and Control the other functions as well. But I don't use the functions enough to have a muscle memory for that, and because of that, I end up using the tool options for that, and then I forget to switch them back on. So here we are. This is going to be the help lines. A bit of a bounding box here. So, thing is that we want to start here on the red circle and broaden it out. I think the broadest point is going to actually be along the horizon line here. And then we want it to sort of curl back on itself. So we have one point here that's going to interact with this and this. So this contour line is not going to be difficult. It's just straight up and down. And we are going to have the midpoint of the outer wall. That's going to be my estimation here. There is probably a more rigorous way. No. I had already drawn out the midpoint. It's this one. There's probably a more rigorous way to do this, but unfortunately, I'm not aware of what that might be. Then we have the midpoint here. That is this midpoint and this midpoint. And now I am going to mirror. I think this is this is the key M if you want to do it by keyboard shortcuts. Because of the way my drawing space is set up, my keyboard is right of the tablet, so that makes it a little bit, let's say, uncomfortable, awkward to use the keyboard while drawing. I think this is going to have to be a little bit further out then, or maybe the curve has to be a bit milder. Around here and then back here. I'm going to have to scale this down a bit. This is not really looking at all like a barrel because it is far too high for a barrel. But since we are still working on the volumes and contour lines here, I can just rescale it without any issues. And then let's have, I think at this point I might be interested in turning the tools off here. Let's see if I can, yes, I can make them invisible. That's going to be enough. We might want to keep them, but for now they can stay away. And let's put in some cross contours. And then again, there's probably a more rigorous way to do this. I like to, just visually carve things, break them up into these facets. Since we are imagining this as a barrel, I am also going to add in some barrel bands. Let's see if mirroring will work. That's nice. When I need forts or something like that, I generally don't really measure it. I just halve things and then halve things. Of course, you can't use this method to arrive at 1/3, for example, but I just eyeball it. There's you will always have to have some sort of a balance between actually doing everything perfectly and while still having fun drawing. Now at this point I am going to use the transform scale layer to new size while I have my group selected here. I am not going to constrain proportions. I am going to roughly halve the height. And let's see how it turns out. That was perhaps a little bit too much. So undo and scale the height to 60%. This is as a percentage of the entire drawing area. So that looks much better. Still not quite perfect in my opinion, but good enough. And turn down the opacities, and at this point I am going to actually start, drawing the lines that belong to a barrel. Yeah, this brush is good for it. Let's go back to blue. So what we actually have on a barrel, we'll probably actually have a barrel band at the top here. Then you would have the bulging portion of the barrel. Then you would have a band at the bottom here, and at least one band in the middle here. I don't think you would actually have at least not very many bands running higher up or lower down here. But I am going to draw some. Might not be entirely realistic, but what it is going to be is helpful to break down the sections on the barrel here. So there's one barrel band. There's another one. And at least one around the middle is going to be quite useful. I have not yet found a good way to move the canvas without reaching over and using my mouse. So this is going to be slightly broader here in the middle. Since our camera is perfectly in the middle, it is going to be symmetrical and slightly broader in the middle than at the edges. No, that was not helpful. I'm going to re-rotate instead. It seems fine to me. So, how many do I actually want to have here? I think having some extra here and here is going to be fine. I think having them at the quarters as well is going to be a little bit overblown. I can use those as guidelines for the facets, but I don't think I need them for the line art. So this time it's going to be a little bit asymmetric. The underside is closer to us than the upper side, so it's going to be sort of doing a recurve bulge here. And on the upper side, it's just going to be a simple curve. Then on the other side, it's going to be again the central side, where we want a sort of a slight recurve. And at the extreme side, it's just a simple curve. You might notice that I'm sort of honing in on the curve that I want. For this, you might even want to turn down the opacity on the tool. In this case, I'm controlling the opacity with the on one side with the pressure. I am not pressing quite as hard with the stylus than I am towards the end. And of course the additive nature of the tool. So when I keep working on it, it keeps on getting darker where I am putting in more lines. It's sort of a deterministic method where I end up getting more lines in areas that are going to be more or less correct, and because of that, they end up being darker and being more strongly interpretable in the line art. Actually, I am going to give the bands a bit of volume here. I'm being a bit lazy about it, so it's not... If I wanted to do this entirely correctly, I would have to, actually draw a volume for the entire band around the entire barrel, but for our purposes, that's not necessary. Another question of how what balance of quality to effort do you want to hit? Of course, the fantasy when you want to draw is of course having an amazing artwork appear quickly. That's unfortunately not really how it works until you are actually a master artist, as I am not. And if you are taking art advice from me, you are not as well. You will be able to find demonstrations from artists like that on YouTube. But I am not one of them. And perhaps exactly because of that, you might be inclined to listen to me, as I have more of a method than a massive amount of talent. So I am going to add in a very transparent layer on the top here that contains the helping lines. Well, it's going to be extremely transparent once I'm done with it. While I am working, I'm going to keep it opaque so that I can actually see what I'm doing. The idea with the transparency is that it is going to be the offset here. That's because the materials are at different heights. This is going to be the cross contour of the barrel, and it's going to be slightly above everything else so that I can keep it turned on while I'm working on the other things. Of course, the offset between the cross contour on the barrel and the bands is going to get more extreme the further away you get from the center point. Then one more. And then I'm going to rotate and add some helping lines on this side. In this case, mirroring is going to help. So seems about right. Let's actually add in a sort of background wall line layer here. Going to keep the item a bit grounded in the world. To rotate again. Much better. And I can use the helping lines from before to draw in a sort of tile floor. There's only one here and one here and one here. Then rotate back and one here, and probably somewhere around there. So now we can turn these things off and turn this one down. And now I am going to... Oh, good morning, Sadrena. I am more or less finished with my preparatory work, so I am going to start on inking this barrel. I'm going to make an outline. The outline is a critical part of my my workflow, and then the inline as well. These are both background sketches. This is an overlay. Right, so now it's time to get a bit of a more aggressive brush. This is the ink number 3 G pen. I think the pop-ups are not visible, but if you're using Kreta, you will be familiar with this. I think it's a standard brush, and I use it a lot, and I think a lot of people use it a lot. So that's a bit too much. I think 5 pixels was quite fine, and I'm going to make this black. The idea of having a separate outline layer is that with this I will be able to use the contiguous selection tool on the inside of this here in order to have the entirety of the item selected, and then we get into the layer inheritances and so forth that we were doing yesterday. I guess I'm a bit out of practice with this tool. I'm not happy with the line quality at all. I'm just going to use the hard pencil again. I like it when it looks a bit rougher anyway. But let us turn the size down a bit. Yeah, this is much more my style. A deep problem with using a soft brush like this for an outline might be that the outline is not actually that hard. You might have some permeability problems. There's a hole somewhere, pixel-sized hole, so the contiguous area cannot actually identify it. The magnetic selection would be a good candidate for working around that. But let's see if I manage a nice outline. All of this is, of course, much more work as compared to just redrawing, but I find that it's an investment of effort. That when I make more of an effort at this point, things like coloring and shading all become much easier as a result. Here we are starting to get into an area where the curvature is not natural for the arm, and because of that I was starting to curve in the wrong direction. And now I was touching my my keyboard. I hope nothing happened. Everything seems fine. And as I think I talked about yesterday as well, working with a natural movement of the arm is a good idea, a much better idea than trying to force your body to fit whatever you are trying to accomplish. So the inline is going to be the barrel bands, and I might add a contour grid as well for the shading work, but probably in this case not really. I don't think it will be necessary. So I am just going to work with two ink layers. Seems fine. Next one. Now it's coming along. That's not what I want. If you zoom further out, it's going to be easier to have a bold line, but the problem is that then it's going to be harder to hit your sketch. Well, here I have sort of a symmetrical problem with this. I think I am going to try zooming out for a bold line across here. Now that's looking all right. And then I can refine it a little bit, darken it up, strengthen it in some places. That's more or less what I wanted. Very good. Then rotate some more. Some more. And here we are looking for a bold line for the barrel band again. They're all a little bit too curved. That's looking all right. Now if I can meet it on this side, yeah. That's not perfect, but good enough. Fairly good one. I think gentle curves are a little bit more difficult to draw boldly. Because with, extreme curves, you can just throw your hand or arm across the paper or screen. But when you want to have a gentle, understated curve, I guess it's probably a question of practice. So when you do it a lot, you probably get better at it. And one more line, and I think then I am going to be done with the line art for this. All right, then we have the outline, and I'm going to start a new group. It's going to be the colors. I'm going to pick the outline, and then I am going to pick the contiguous selection tool, and that did not work. I've got a selection mask that appears to be the entire drawing. So instead of that, I am going to use using the magnetic tool. This is basically, I don't know why it's called magnetic. It's basically, semi-automatic selection. Let's actually start it on the line. Because the outline is entirely on this one layer, the tool will have a relatively easy time finding landing where I want it to go, because there's nothing to mess with the algorithm here. I think you have to you practically have to use have these blocks on the line. So if you just put them in the vicinity of the line, it's probably going to force its way into the empty area, which is of course not what we want to happen. But other than that, it's very functional. So how do I finish this? I actually use this relatively rarely. I think complete. Yeah, that's looking good. We'll name this base color, and then I am going to just fill it with something that seems like a halfway realistic barrel color, you know, kind of a reddish brown. The overlay is barely visible, just the way I wanted it. And at this point, I am going to keep the selection and basically do the same thing, except now I'm going to remove the wooden areas. So now I'm going to select the entire ink selection, and we are going to use the subtract mode for the magnetic selection. So now the outlines and the inlines are going to be usable. And when I start here and work my way along the outlines of the barrel bands, like this. Morning, Lapis. Yeah, as you can see, it forced its way up there. That's not really where we want it. Can we? Yeah, we can move it. Let's have one there. That is not what I want to happen. This is not working as desired, to be honest. I'm just going to, you know, start a whole new selection. Now, at this point, I can use the selection tool to on the base. No, apparently not. A setting problem. I want to have the current layer selected. There's also you can pick color selections from or selections in general from the current layer, all layers, or color labeled layers. So you can, for example, you could have a single, you know, color layer if you wanted to. Actually, I'm going to just go ahead and do it like that. You can just color in on this layer. Let's give it a like a whitish color. Of course, this is the inverted selection of what we want to have. Let's see if we can invert it here easily. Select, invert selection. So that is what we want to have, but we also would like to have a bit more here. No, we are going to want to erase in that case. No, again. What we want? We want white. Now we have a selection mask here, and we can just throw in some gray where we want the barrel bands to be. It's working by hand. There's a bit of a case of diminishing returns when you want to use the automatic tools and when you want to use the when you want to just work by hand. For example, if you're drawing a human character, the details of the eyes and the face and things like that are not really something that it's worth it trying to fiddle with the tools here. And I would not want to do this for the entire barrel, for example. But I think that painting in the barrel bands might be more effective to do it with the actual tools. But for demonstration purposes, I am going to do it by hand. Having all of the base colors on one layer is in some ways helpful, in some other ways unhelpful, I find. You could, if you want to avoid having a huge stack of layers, you could have one layer for your base colors and one hard light or soft light layer for your shading. I think I love using layer inheritance, as anyone who has been watching the InaProj knows. And layer inheritance doesn't really work if you don't separate all your layers. Was having a relatively faint line art like this for the inlines, it might be too faint for the automatic functions to actually recognize. So it might be that I would be forced to do this by hand for this case in any way. No. Here's another problem with working on one layer. You can't just erase when you make a mistake, since you are going to be erasing the other base color. Greta does have one of those automatic coloring tools that made a big buzz at some point when the first first function like that appeared in, I don't know, probably Photoshop or something. But I'm not really familiar with it, so I don't. I think that would generate a a single layer line art. So single layer flat coloring from your line art. How it works, how well it works, I don't know. I probably should try it out at some point. Seems like something that would save a lot of time, especially in the long run. And then you could just, pick contiguous color regions, save them maybe as layer selections, or copy them into their own layers for layer inheritance and stuff. It's probably very practical. It's one of those things that seem intimidating when you don't know how it works. You probably have to set up your line art for it as well, so it might not be directly compatible with my usual workflow. But a major positive of digital art, of course, is that you can just make copies. If I have to merge all of my inline and outline layers, for example, I can just copy the group, flatten it, and then use that flattened layer as the input for the tool. So here we are. Of course, a large positive of this method of having a flat color base layer seems that the right click rotation only comes up when you have a painting brush selected. So now I can just, paint all over the background and absolutely nothing happens. No problem at all. I'm going to make the floor tiles a bit darker here. We've got some, I think this layer is the, oh yeah, that's all of the line art here. I'm just going to raise that a bit darker, and it should be fine. It's slightly blue. It looks fine on a white background, but the moment that you add some sort of color under it, it just disappears. And some, cheap and dirty texture. Just wiggling my stylus around a little bit. It ends up looking maybe a little bit more like natural stone. I'm not going to actually make an effort to give this volume. I don't think so. I'm going to need to save some energy for the actual working on the actual project for today. That should be fine. So here we have a sort of color in background for everything. So the next step would be coloring. So now I am going to add in a hard light layer, and I am going to add in a hard light layer on top of here as well. Oh, I think you can't see those file dialogues either. Might be a bit unfortunate. There's obviously when I'm reading in files or saving files, I don't want you to see my the Explorer settings or incriminating folders, but seeing the uh, tooltips and settings would be a good thing. Well, tough luck, I guess. I think it's better this way than the other way around. So now we have a hard light layer that we actually want to fill with a neutral gray first. I don't think it is a hard light layer at the moment, because this is not how a hard light layer is supposed to be working. We have to make it inherit alpha. Now it's working. And the reason that we want to fill this with neutral gray everywhere is that the neutral gray is a color. I'm going to start a new layer and demonstrate this. So if you have, you can, I have taken 100% black, so white 0%, and I am going to airbrush in some, a layer of 100% black at 25% opacity, and then I am going to get 75% gray at 100 opacity. There is no difference between these, because it's visually it's the same, but for the purposes of the computer it's entirely different. So for example, if I want to take, copy the color, when I copy it from this, it's black. When I copy it from this, it's gray. And that means that if you don't have this neutral gray background, you can't pick a color that you already got right, because you are not selecting the color, you are selecting the components that make it up. And when everything starts with the 50% gray, the central components are the same everywhere. So it just works. And as we remember from yesterday, with a hard light layer, if you perhaps give it some less opacity, if you just add something that is brighter than 50% gray, it's going to come up lighter. If you add something that's bright and colored, it's going to gain some of that color. And conversely, if it's under that level, then it's going to become darker and darker. However, I do not actually want any of this yet. I want to think about it a bit first. I'm going to add a bit of something here in the overlay layer in black so that it's visible. And I want to decide what the direction of the light is going to be. It's going to be not quite perfectly from this side, let's say. It's going to be slightly from back and right, and slightly up. And what that means is that we are going to have some highlights on facets that are on this side of the center line of the barrel. So these are not yet in the absolute brightest area, but this section is going to be. Actually, I'm going to copy this one before we go too far, so that I can have a saved neutral color layer to work on a different on some different values. So these ones are a bit right, and then we want to pick some that are above the center line. It's going to be somewhere around here. This is the way that I have drawn it here. It's relatively strong. So I am going to make the components up here quite bright. And of course the barrel bands here are going to be relatively bright on their overside. There's going to be a shadow under them. And then some bright area under here. Maybe a little bit even behind here. On the other side, the absolute darkest areas of the barrel are of course going to be where the sun doesn't shine. So that is going to be particularly on the underside of the barrel band. And honestly, the further away we get from the light, there will be some maximal light on the floor behind it. Also maximal shadow. The shadows for wood are one thing. The shadows for the metal are going to be less diffuse. There's more of a catastrophically dark and catastrophically light area to it. And that is a part of the reason that I actually do have these extra layers. I am going to give it some general highlight on this side and some general shadow on the other side. This of course the shadows will stack, so you can use several layers to add several different kinds of passes without making things impossible to erase and edit later. Of course, in this case you cannot erase, you will have to replace it with neutral gray, but for the purposes of explanation, replacing with neutral gray is going to be called erasing. So then we want the barrel bands. I am going to just straight up use a white here and my trusty bundle of pencils brush. This is a case where you would like to have a separate layer inheritance so that you could just boldly throw some white around without having to bother at all with overlaying parts of the overlaying parts of the wooden areas. I have forgotten to turn down the opacity, so I'm going to redo that. When you jack down the opacity, that's another... how unfortunate. When you jack down the opacity, it means that you can you build up the white slower than you otherwise would, so you can work a bit more aggressively, which I always advocate working aggressively. It's both more fun, and I think that it results in more strong artwork, more bold. And then we are going to have that contrast with a sharp turn into darkness. I'm going to use the copy. I'm actually going to put that on its just straight up on its own layer, again for simplicity's sake. The thing is that because the metal is more shiny than the wood, then the optical apparent visual darkness of the barrel bands is also going to change far more aggressively than the brightness of the wood does. So something like this. I think the base colors are already relatively fine. Then we are going to need some, details here. I am going to make a copy. I'm going to check down the opacity a lot here and go to town on texturing the wood here. I think the bundle is not suitable for this. I'm going to try the hard pencil. I think that's not quite right either. Let's try something else. No, this is too modern. The bundle might be the best one after all, although maybe I should make it a bit larger. There might be an ink setting, or perhaps it's a paint one. There's some sort of a brush that gives this bundle of ink aesthetic that I often use for texturing things like this, but I don't know where it is. It might be too much work trying to find it, unless it's under texture. It is under texture. It's this one. It's another one of those things where I would like to just pull it through everything, but I will not be able to do that because I usually don't use this workflow, so I haven't set it up correctly to do it like that. Let's go back to favorites, and I am going to make an effort with the bundle. And at this point, I'm going to check down the opacity on the overlay so that I can actually see what I am doing here. I'm also going to give the barrel itself some volume with this. The barrel is made out of planks, so it is going to have some shadows at the edges of those planks. It's going to have somewhat less of that, of course, on the light side. At this point, I'm going to turn off the overlay. Now strengthen some things here. And I can copy the neutral color, so I can, just weaken these. No, it did not actually copy the perfectly neutral gray, which I want to have. So I'm going to select it from the palette here and then use it to sort of partially erase some of these things. Then I am going to add some relatively small highlights. And these are going to be at sort of the edge. No, actually, I think the shadows are not going to be visible from this side, so I'm just going to highlight. The edges of the barrel planks are going to have a bit of a highlight to them. On this side, I'm just going to replace my shading with these. There's going to be some highlight to it. Sounds like the side tube is having some sort of skipping issue there. So at this point, what I desperately need here is some texture. This is all looking way too airbrushed, and for that I am going to put in some dark and take a look at the textures and try to pick something out that would make this, maybe the crackles. Check down the opacity. This is the same trick that I used on the rocks in the postcard drawing. The scale might be a little too big. I'm going to check down the opacity even more and then just, have more layers of it. So, that's more or less the coloring method that I use. So I did not actually color in the facets one by one, and instead I used this contour grade as a sort of helping tool for this. And it turns out that this has actually taken a lot longer than I expected. It's already been an hour and a quarter. So time to end this segment.